Hello there, and welcome to the second video in this series on Unity Fundamentals, recorded specially for the students of Saturday Academy. I'm your instructor, Will Patillo, and in this episode, our focus is going to be on creating some basic scripting that allows this character we created in the last video to move around the scene. So I'm going to start by, in my Assets window, right-clicking and creating a folder and calling it scripts. And I'm going to double click in this to navigate into it, and I'm going to be creating two scripts today. One that handles the actual movement, and another that handles getting the keyboard input from the player. And I'm be separating out in this way so that the movement can be reused by AI characters later on in the game. So I'm going to start out with creating a keyboard input script. I'm going to right-click, create C# script. Okay, and that creates one right there. And I'm going to call this keyboard input. Okay, and double-click on it, and this will open it up in a code editor. I am using Visual Studio Code, which I find works pretty well, but you can use anything else. It all works the same, just a matter of preference. And I'm going to delete those template methods of start and update that were there to begin with, because I'll be writing all of this from the beginning. I'm going to start by declaring some variables. So what I have here is type in key code, and pay attention to capitalization because that matters. And I'm going to create one, call this forward. Okay, and so this creates a variable that holds the key that's used to move forward. Key code is a reserved word. Unity knows what it means. Forward is just a name of a variable that I made up. Now, one other thing I'm going to add here is I can put in a couple of these square brackets and type in serialize field. Okay. Now, what this does is if I go back into the editor, and also so we can see this, I'm going to click on the player and drag this keyboard input onto the player. By the way, I could do this. I could add this. Another way I could add this component. So let's see. If I remove it, I could click Add Component and then just type it in, keyboard input, and add it that way. So now you'll notice right here, there's a thing that says forward. Now, one thing you might just to show you, if I delete that, then this variable or this exposed variable goes away. Serialize field serializes it, so I can see it in the editor. And I could also get the same effect by typing in public key code forward. And this way this exposed variable will be here that way as well. The difference between serialized field and public is that if a variable is public, then that means this variable can be accessed from other scripts and also serializes. Whereas serialized field makes it available in the inspector, but it is only accessible in the script. And here we don't really need anything else to be messing around with forward just now, so we'll just use serialized field. And if we need things to access it later, then we can always change it to public then. A little bit of a digression. So anyway, over here, and we can click this drop down here, and we get a whole list of all the keys that are available on the keyboard. So you can use whatever you like. You can use WASD, but I won't because I'm not a monster. To find things quickly, I mean, clicking in this can take forever. So if I want to look for a particular thing and say like up arrow, I can press the U key, and it goes to the first thing that has a U in it. And then I press it again, it goes to the next thing with a U in it, and again, and now I have the up arrow. Is this. I've set a value to this variable. Now, to actually make use of it, type in, create a method, void update. And update is a reserved method in Unity. This will run every single frame. And the reason that Unity knows what this is because of this MonoBehavior right here. MonoBehavior is a class, so this uses inheritance. So everything that's in MonoBehavior is available to every class that inherits from it, and keyboard input is one of those. What MonoBehavior does is allows you to attach it as a component to objects in a scene, and it also gives you methods like start, update, on enable, and so on. You also, this library up here using Unity Engine allows you to inherit from MonoBehavior. Otherwise, if you don't have this, Unity isn't going to know what MonoBehavior means, and if you don't have MonoBehavior, then it's updates just a random word like taco cat. But update is meaningful because of MonoBehavior. And on speaking of which, I am using Unity Engine in this script, but I'm not using these other two. So I'm going to get rid of System.Collections and Collections Generic. Just as an aside, generic, you'll typically need this whenever you're using lists and some other things, but mostly lists. And System.Collections you'll typically use if you're using coroutines or invokes, time-based things. It has lots of other, they both have lots of other purposes, but those are the rule of thumb cases where you'll need those libraries. Getting rid of them can reduce the overhead a little bit. I just find it makes things a little cleaner. If you leave them in, there's really no harm in it. Alright, so anyway though, in my update, I'm going to check every frame if this forward key is being pressed. So the way I'm going to do that is if InputGateKey and forward. So this will check if the user is pressing the key that I have assigned to this forward variable, which in my case is the numpad 8. And this will evaluate to true if they are, and false if they are not. Now, to see the result of it, I am going to use the console. So what I'm going to type here is debug.log and forward key pressed in these quotes. So now what will happen, and make sure to put a semicolon at the end. So now what will happen is when I press play, and I click the console menu, and I press 8, nothing is happening. So the problem was I just made a mistake over here. I used alpha 8. What I actually want is Keypad 8 right down here. So I select that, and now I run the game, and I press 8, and now forward key is pressed. I let go, and this stops incrementing. So right now I have collapse there, so I press it, and it's generating more and more of these console messages, one for every single frame, and not when I let go. Okay, so that's how I get that forward movement. So let's go ahead and add in some other movements. So I'm going to create some more variables here. I'm just going to type in back, left, and right. Now I could also use a serialize field, key code, back and then semicolon, and do that for left and right. But if you have multiple variables and they're all the same type, you can just put commas in between them and keep it all on one line. Just a matter of style. Alright, so now I have variables for forward, back, left, and right, and now I'm going to copy this. So Control C, Control V, and create a bunch of different cases. So I can go forward, up, down, and forward, back, left, and right. And now here, say back key pressed, left key pressed, right key pressed. All right. Save that. Go back here, and now I should have several more variables come up. So back, left, and right. And so for back, I'm going to use Keypad 5. And for left, I'm going to go with Keypad 4. And for right, go down to Keypad 6. Okay. So now if I run this, and I'm going to collapse these, it's just so that it doesn't spam the log. I'll just see the numbers of them. I press the 4, then I get lots of left key pressed. I press the 6, I get right key pressed, up, forward key, down, back key. Okay, now this is 5, this is 8, 4, and 6. And you can use whatever configurations you like. You'll get the same messages as long as you press the right keys. Okay, so now instead of just putting words out to the console, let's put out a direction. So I'm going to, instead of having this forward key pressed, I'm going to say debug.log vector3.forward. And here, vector3.back, vector3.left, and lastly, vector3.right. So now instead of printing out just English text messages, we're sending out some vector 3s. And so let's take a look at what those are. So I press play, and I press my 8 or my forward key, and I get 0, 0, 1. So that's a 1 on the z-axis, which is forward. If I press my back key, then it's a -1 there, and 0s on the x and y. 4, I have a -1 on the z-axis, and 6, I have a +1. Oh, sorry, on the x-axis. And 0 and y is always 0 because we're never moving up and down. All right, so now I'm printing out these movements, but that's, all well and interesting, but remember what we really want is to be actually move the character around. So I'm going to create a new script that deals with movement. So create a new C# script, move and rotate. Get rid of these methods right here, and get rid of these libraries. I don't need them. And I'm going to create a method. It's going to be a public method that I am calling void move, and it's going to take in as an argument something of a vector3 type. I call it direction. And when it receives that direction, type in here transform.translate direction times time.deltaTime. Now what this does, it's going to take the transform that this script is attached to, and actually speaking of which, I'm going to go ahead and attach it. So go on the player, drag on this move and rotate. So that transform, it refers to this right here. And it's going to move it or translate it by this direction variable, like this number that's being passed in. And this time.deltaTime makes it not frame dependent. So if I left this out, then it's going to move a distance of 1 positively or negatively on the x or the y axis every single frame. And that's just very fast. And it'll be different speeds depending on your latency, how fast your computer is. So time.deltaTime solves that. This takes the amount of time from since the last frame. And so the faster the computer is running, the smaller this number will be, which will shrink down the amount that the transform moves, and that will exactly cancel out the additional speed it gets from running more frames. And if that didn't make any sense, just remember, you multiply this by your movement whenever you don't want things to be frame dependent. All right, so this handles movement, but now we need to actually call it from our keyboard input. So first, we need a reference to it. So I'm going to create a variable right here, move and rotate. I'm just going to call it movement. So this declares our variable. And this just creates space for it in the class. We still need to actually get a reference to this script. So for that, I'm going to type in a void awake, and this is another reserved method inside of Unity. This will happen as soon as the scene opens and the object that this attached to is active. So if this is inactive when the scene opens, it'll be as soon as it activates. If it's active to begin with, then it's as soon as the scene starts. So in this awake method, I'm going to get this reference here. So I'll type in movement equals get component, move and rotate. So this get component searches the object that this script is attached to, or that this keyboard input is attached to, and it looks for a component of type move and rotate, or this one. And then it'll assign that to this variable. So now, down here, instead of this debug log vector3.forward, I can say movement.move vector3.forward. So this will go. So this variable gets a reference to this, and then this .move goes to this method right here, and then inside this parentheses passes in the argument that this method needs to be able to make its movement. So then I'll do the same thing for the rest of these. I'll just replace the debug.log with movement.move. There, there, and there. I'll also, just so I can see what's going on a little better, I'm going to take this camera and move it a little closer to the player, center it a bit more. I got my camera preview to see what's going on, and then I'll turn it down a little bit, lift it up. Okay. Then I can just see what's going on a bit better. All right, so now hit play, and now as I press these arrow keys, I can see my character moving around. Now, one thing I'm going to do before anything else is notice that the character is moving around in my view, and it could very easily get off the screen. So I want the character to kind of just stay in this third-person view. So, very easy way to do that is I'm going to take this camera and I'm going to put it inside of player. Now, when I move around, actually, one other thing I'm going to do here. I'm moving, but it's hard to see that, so I'm just, as a point of reference, I'm going to create another cube. I'm going to just put it up over here, and yeah. So now, as I move around, I can see myself moving forward, back, left, and right. And I can also move diagonally by pressing multiple of them at once. All right. Now, I was moving kind of slowly, and I'd also like to be able to have some more control over how fast my character moves. So I'm going to add in a new variable here, and use a serialized field here, and create a float. So this is the type, and I call it move speed. Right? And because it's serialized, I can now enter that in this move and rotate. I'm going to set this to 5. Feel free to use whatever values you like. Now I'm going to take this move speed and I'm going to put it in this equation right here. So direction times move speed times time.delta time. So now I should be moving a little faster. Press play, and yes, moving nice, satisfying, kind of like a run pace. If I want to change it, I can just change it to 3, and now I'm more of a moderate pace. I could set it to 20, and now I'm going like really fast, whatever you like. Oh, by the way, one thing you might find is if you're pressing the keys and nothing's happening, just click inside the scene view so that it knows to be running things. So I'm going to set that back to 5 and stop playing the scene. So that deals with movements, and I have the view kind of set in this third-person perspective. If I want to change the perspective, I can just move this around. So like say if I want to be a little closer, like that. Now my point of view is now at this location. Alright. Okay, so that gets my movement. Now, one other thing you might want is just add a little bit of extra functionality here. Suppose you want to also use the WASD keys instead of only having these options for your forward, back, left, and right. We'll give the player some options. So instead of just having key code, I'm going to put these little brackets right here. And now I have an array for forward, back, left, and right. Problem, however, is that's going to create some errors because I can't convert from an array to an array of key codes, and right here what I'm looking for is a single key code, and that doesn't match. And I want to iterate through all the possibilities anyway, so I'm going to deal with that now. So for that, I'm going to use a for each and key code key in forward. For each key in the array of forward key codes, if that key is pressed, then I move forwards. And just for now, I'm going to comment all this other stuff out to keep things a little simpler, so I'm not copy-pasting quite as much. All right, now, and I go back into my scene, I should, let's see, if InputGateKey is key, I was typing in. So what that error was is I'm looking at InputGateKey and I'm looking for an array when that doesn't make any sense. InputGateKey looks for a single key code and not an array of key codes. So instead I should be looking for this individual key out of this array. So I'm going to type in key there, and now this error should go away. And now that the error has gone away, the serialization changes. So now for each of these, I have these numbers that I can open up. And I can type in 2 here, and now I have 2 different elements. So I'm going to, just as before, I'm going to type in K to get the keypad, and I'm looking for keypad 8. And then for the second one, I'm going to look for the W. So now, if I press play, I can move forward by pressing 8, or also by pressing the W. And the other ones are not working right now. So, one thing though that you may notice is that there's a little bit of code here, and it's kind of repetitive having 4 different ones. So I'm going to create a method out of this and just have several calls to that to streamline things a little bit so we don't have a bunch of repetition. So type in private void detect move key pressed. And this is going to look so this is going to just take all the things that these have in common and pass in the differences as variables. So type in key code and in array keys and vector3 direction. Okay, and then I'll just cut and paste this. So now instead of looking for key in forward, I'm looking for key in all of the keys that get passed in, and then I'm going to move in the direction that gets passed in instead of specifically forward. Now I can just say detect moved key pressed and pass in forward and vector3 dot forward. Okay. Now this does exactly the same thing, it's just moved it over. So so to show you that, save. Oh wait, key does not exist in the current. Right, in keys. It's not key in key. That doesn't make any sense. So now I run it. I press 8, I move forward. Press W, I move forward. Great. Now you might be wondering, well, what's the point of having this method for things that work just fine? Well, the value is now I can just take this and copy it a couple of times, and now I can just say back, left, and right, back, left, and right. Okay. And now, in just these 4 lines, I'm able to get what would have been 3, 6, 9, 12 lines by using this helper method there. It also, I like to keep the update method short. You know, the whole game is based on things happening every frame, and update can easily get out of hand if you just put everything that happens in update. So delegating things out will make your life a lot easier. Alright, so now I need to actually fill out these options. So I'm going to create 2 options for everything. And so for back, I'm going to go back to having this Keypad 5 and or the S for backwards movement. For left, Keypad 4 or the A key. Oh, there it is. And for right, the Keypad 6 or the D key. Again, it's just by having this menu up and hitting that the first letter that you're looking for again and again to find things quickly. Alright, now this should work the same as before, except now it works for all forwards of movement. So right now I'm using the 10 key to move around, now I'm using the WASDs, and they both work. And I could add as many options as I like. Alright, so that's moving forward, back, left, and right. Now I also want to deal with rotation. So I'm going to start by setting up my controls the same as before. I'll just add a few extra key codes here. So serialize field, key code, and I'll call these turn left, turn right, and I could just put commas to make this line longer, but it's just a visual preference right here. Turn left, turn right, and that'll be all for now. And this is going to be structured the same way, but it's going to act a little bit differently. Instead of moving, it's going to rotate, so we need a different method for this. So type in private void detect rotate key pressed, key code keys, and this time instead of having a vector3 direction, I'm going to use an int for direction, and I'll be passing in a +1 or a -1 to determine whether I'm rotating clockwise or counterclockwise. And so for each key in keys, if that key is pressed, then instead of moving, I'm going to rotate and also pass in that direction. This time is an int. Now, rotate doesn't exist, and the compiler is going to complain about that. So I'm going to, just to make that go away, I'm going to create my method over here, public void rotate, and this takes in an int of a direction, and I'll just leave this empty for now so that this error goes away. Okay, and then next I'll actually call this method in my update loop. So detect rotate key pressed, and I'm going to pass in the turn left set of keys. And for left, the direction is going to be -1. Copy this, and for the right, it is +1. So these two calls right here will get +1s or -1s whenever whatever I assign to these turn left and turn right keys have been pressed. Let's also deal with setting these now. So I'm going to create two options for each again. And for the 10 key version, I'm going to use the Keypad 7 for turning left and Keypad 9 for turning right. For the WASD option, I'm going to use the Q key for turning left and the E key for turning right. So that should get my input. And just to test this, I'll put in a debug.log direction, just so we make sure that this input is working. It won't actually rotate the character, but we can see if we are on the right track. So I press play, and I press the 7, and I'm getting both +1 and -1. That's an interesting error. I press 9, and nothing happens. Q, same thing happens for Q and E. Okay, I think I know what the error is. If I go back in here, I'm passing in turn left in both of these. I need to have this one turn right. Try that again. Press 7, and I'm getting a -1. I press 9, and I'm getting +1. Press Q, and this get more of these -1s. Press E, I get more of those +1s. Great, so our input is working. Now let's actually make use of it in this move and rotate method. Type in transform.rotate vector3.up times turn speed. Oh, and I haven't declared turn speed yet, so I'll just put in a comma, turn speed. Okay, so that Unity knows what that is, and I can fill this in the inspector. Turn speed times direction. And also, actually, just to be clear how this is working, instead of direction, I'm going to call this clockwise. Okay, and it's fine if I leave this saying direction here. The name of the argument that I send and the name that's received, they don't have to match. So call this clockwise. So this is the axis of rotation. This is how fast and then I multiply that by how fast I'm turning, and then I multiply that by the direction. And again, I'm going to bring in times time dot delta time, so that it's, again, not frame rate dependent. And then lastly, just one other argument I'm going to throw in here, space dot world, so that I'm rotating in world space rather than local space. I think in this case either one would most likely work just fine. So, alright, so that is my rotation code. Let's see if this works. If I press the play button. One problem I'm seeing right off here is my turn speed is 0. So I'm going to put 180 right there. And now if I press 7, now I'm turning. I can move forward, back, turn, left, and right. Great. So it is working. Oh, one also thing to be careful about is since I entered this number while the game was in play mode, this is going to go away as soon as I exit. So be careful of not making tons of changes while you're in play mode, or you can get burned on that. So I'll put 180 in now while it's not in play, and now it will stay that way. And actually, just to prevent me from making that mistake again, I'm going to go into Edit, Preferences, and let's see. In Colors, I'm going to go into Play Mode Tint, and I'm going to set a nice little bit of a green color, a light green like that. So this is in Play Mode Tint. Now, when I press the play button, everything changes color, and I know that I'm in play mode. And when I exit out, it goes back to gray. It'll prevent me from making a bunch of errors like that again. Alright, so now we have moving left, right, forward, back, and turning. And so that is our movement system. And because we have this move and rotate in a separate script, we'll be able to attach this to anything else that moves, that has a move speed and a turn speed, and we just have to pass in what direction it's going. So that is all for this tutorial on getting the keyboard input moving and rotating. In the next video, we're going to be creating a very simple little escape the room game, creating some basic interactions and some very useful general purpose scripts in the process. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.